It takes resilience and cooperation to tackle the challenges of the modern world, whether through technology, traditional knowledge, or sheer determination. People are forging paths towards a better, more sustainable future, one that's better for everyone. I am Chris Lems in Lagos, Nigeria. Great to have you with us, and here's what's coming up. Protecting disabled communities from Mozambique's extreme weather. Bringing life back to Germany's forested wetlands. Rethinking traditions and sparking change in Ghana. We start the show in Mozambique. As we know by now, extreme weather events are becoming more common around the world, and Mozambique is a country that faces some of the worst consequences, even though it bears almost no blame for climate change. With over 2,500 kilometers of coastline, it's highly vulnerable to cyclones. And when disaster strikes, its disabled communities are in even greater danger than most.
Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique's coast in March 2019, packing winds of over 200 kilometers an hour. Helena Dorigo lives in Beira, which took a direct hit. Some windows were flying off. We tried to hold them down with ropes, but some still flew away. The roof blew off too. It was one of the worst tropical cyclones ever recorded in Africa and Mozambique's worst humanitarian crisis. Over 1,500 people died. Many of the victims were people with disabilities, like Helena, who had polio as a child. For her, family support was vital. If I was alone, I don't know what would have happened. There were 11 of us in total. When you have lots of people together, you don't feel so afraid. On your own, you think, I'm going to die. But there were so many of us, and we had shelter. We kept talking, and Elena is brave. Luckily, the living room of the house withstood the winds and gave protection to the family. Helena was stuck there for 3 weeks. Our streets were all flooded and filled with stones, metal sheets from roofs, tree trunks. The road was full of rubble, so there was no way to get me out of the house with a wheelchair. It would have been impossible. To this day, Helena's house still bears the marks of Cyclone Idai. After the tragedy, she opted to become a specialist in inclusive disaster preparedness. Now she works as a facilitator for an NGO. It's a job that's growing in importance globally. As the planet warms, disasters like Cyclone Idai will become more intense and more frequent. The most vulnerable in society often suffer the most in these climate disasters. People with disabilities are up to 4 times more likely to die in a natural disaster. So the United Nations says they must be involved in prevention.
We understand the situation of ourselves better. Our lived experiences cannot be underestimated. But apart from that, we are experts in many other areas and contribute and enrich the outcome of discussions, planning, implementation, and development arena, bringing the human rights issues in the center.
A UN survey last year showed the past decade has brought little progress in disability inclusion during disasters. 84% of people with disabilities worldwide say they are not prepared for disasters. In such events, early warnings can give people time to prepare or flee. This can save many lives, but information needs to be distributed in accessible formats and through multiple channels. In each country, there are very different ways of reaching people with disabilities. In Mozambique, for example, a variety of methods have been used since Cyclone Idai. We have community radio stations. We also have door-to-door information drives. Then there are pamphlets being given out in the communities. And we also work with associations, which is a key area. This is part of Helena's work. She visits communities to provide training on managing disabilities and preparing for extreme weather. If another cyclone hits Mozambique, simple yet vital instructions like where to get information and where to seek shelter could make the difference between life and death. But her work is also about getting to know these communities. Not knowing the size and characteristics of the disabled population is a big problem. The UN estimates that 1 in 6 people have some form of disability. But without quality information, it's impossible to prepare for a disaster. However, collecting such data can be complicated.
Because of erroneous impressions, stigma, and discrimination, sometimes persons with disabilities are hidden. The families don't want others to know that they exist. We are now together with organizations of persons with disabilities, encouraging states to ensure that in every survey, in every census, persons with disabilities are included.
This is a cyclone simulation exercise organized by authorities and NGOs in Mozambique. One of the objectives is to teach emergency responders to recognize the needs of disabled people. Sometimes they get sent to hospitals instead of shelters, for example, because people misunderstand their condition. We developed this project because when Cyclone Idai hit, we all witnessed that people with disabilities were being left behind in the emergency response. We saw that there was an issue. It is not enough just to provide one-off support. When we see a phenomenon like this, we need to train those institutions that manage natural disasters. Disaster response must be inclusive and take into account the needs of people with different types of disabilities. The best way to do that is to listen to them. So risk and disaster management committees have been set up in local communities. They all have at least one member with disability. We are part of this society. So there needs to be inclusion in every sense. If we are there talking, it's easier for them to remember us. It's like a shout, saying that we are here. The inclusion of people with disabilities in risk and disaster management has the power to save lives. It also shows us the huge potential we can unleash when we remove barriers and create opportunities.
Now we head to Europe and to Germany's wetlands. These landscapes have been disappearing fast around the world. Wetlands may only cover a small fraction of the planet compared to forests, but they are far more efficient at storing carbon. A pioneering project aims to bring Germany's forested wetlands back to life, restoring them as powerful carbon sinks and vibrant biodiversity havens.
This is a wetland in the making. And that takes heavy equipment, a lot of hard work, and even more time. The forests of the Ore Mountains in southeastern Germany used to be full of peat bogs. Almost all were drained to plant fast-growing spruce during the mining boom. Now a comeback is planned. Wetlands help to preserve biodiversity, cope with climate change, and manage water supplies across the region. Forestry authorities are willing to go to great lengths to keep water here. That's a barrier made from larch, intended to dam water and help restore the wetland. Romy Vellner coordinates the project, which aims to re-wet drained forest peatlands across the Ore Mountain region of Saxony. This wetland was drained intensively 200 years ago, using a comprehensive system of drainage channels. They put a lot of work into draining the land back then, so now we have to put a lot of work into blocking the ditches to re-wet the area. Drainage channels crisscross the area. Forest wetlands tend to be on the small side, only 5 to 6 hectares in area. It's initially planned to restore some 80 hectares of bog in the Ore Mountains. That's just a fraction of original wetland areas in the Ore Mountains. Most have been drained and have to be revitalised. We're talking about 60 square kilometres in total. The team frequently flies drones over the wetland areas to monitor the project's progress and document any new water bodies developing in the forest. The different vegetation types are recorded by laser scanners, which also check the impact of increasing soil moisture on them. We want trees to die off due to the wet conditions. In the best-case scenario, some of these brightly coloured trees here will disappear over time, leaving far more open areas. Nearby, we can see what it could look like in the future. Over a year ago, drainage ditches here were dammed, and now the water is 10 centimetres below the surface. The first results are promising. The sphagnum mosses that have colonised this area started growing this year because it's wet enough here now. They're precisely what we want. You can see that they don't rot entirely underwater, and it's precisely that process of incomplete decomposition which forms peat and makes a wetland into a wetland. So, does that help the environment too? Here in the heart of the forest, researchers from the Thunen Institute are measuring the type and amount of gases being emitted by the re-wetted areas. They're trying to gauge the effect of expanding wetlands. In Germany, 2.4% of forests are made up of wetlands. Of course, it's a small area, but you have to remember that we have peat bogs that go 10 metres down below ground. They store huge quantities of CO2. They're vital carbon sinks that we need to protect. Climate change is also affecting the forests of the Ore Mountains. Forestry manager Johannes Riedel has been working here for decades, and he knows how important the area is. I would never have thought that we would have a problem with water shortages in the Ore Mountains. Saxony gets about 20% of its drinking water from the region. 60% of the forest is a drinking water protected area, and so the restoration of bogs is very important to us. Water shortages are also slowing down the re-wetting process. The Ore Mountains forest peatlands depend largely on rainfall. If it doesn't rain much, water doesn't run down off the hills, and the areas remain dry. Restoring a wetland to its original size is a very drawn-out business. During re-wetting, open areas of water are formed, like here in this former peat bog. Over time it will start to close up, and in the final stages, sphagnum mosses will be able to colonise the area again, and the peat bog will start to grow, at the rate of about 1 millimetre a year. It will take about 2,000 years before the peat bog really expands. That's a problem in a time of accelerating climate change. No one here is letting that put them off. There are plenty of drained areas on their to-do list. It will take generations before the forest peatlands in the Ore Mountains can fulfill their potential as a biodiverse habitat, water reservoir and carbon sink.
Back to Africa and to Ghana, where deep-rooted superstitions shape beliefs, especially in rural areas. Some people think bad behavior influences the weather, and that only by appeasing the spirit gods will things improve. Now, these beliefs are not grounded in science, which is why a team of young people is looking to transform attitudes.
They all want the same thing: to do something about climate change. The Disaster Youth Brigade is challenging traditions in their community of Nanyeri, because the dry seasons are lasting longer and the harvests are getting smaller. The rainmaker, however, still relies on old rituals. We are keeping the tradition of our forefathers. Whenever there is drought, we need to perform sacrifices to our ancestors. That's what they were doing to get abundant food and rain. If you don't perform these rites, it won't rain properly. Due to human-induced climate change, weather extremes are also becoming noticeably stronger here in northeastern Ghana. The normal rainy seasons are failing to occur, replaced by sandstorms or torrential downpours. In the Nanyeri community, more and more farmers have planted their fields right up to the banks of the river, where the land is more fertile. But during the heavy rains, the river overflows its banks and crops are often lost. This is why the Youth Brigade marks out the riverbank areas that are not to be planted. The young people are volunteers who have been trained by the National Disaster Management Organization, or NADMO for short.
NADMO people educate us and form this group. So we're able to talk to our chief and the elders, and they are supporting us. So they say, well, any effort we should do so that the flooding will reduce. And we say then this year we have to measure a limit away from the river so that if we are not farming close to the river, the flooding will reduce.
Growing crops too close to the riverbed has negative consequences for the environment, scientists warn.
When they farm close to water bodies, the size of the water body begins to reduce. Then also erosion takes place and you have deposition of silt in the bed.
Rainfall is also affected by rampant deforestation. When harvests fail, the sale of firewood and charcoal is the only alternative source of income. Then the villagers cut down even more trees, a vicious cycle. Because the fewer the trees, the less it rains. The volunteers of the brigade discuss all these issues with the villagers. Bushfires are a recurring theme. People set them during the dry season to make it easier to hunt game. When there is fire outbreak, we go to put it out and investigate the cause. If someone deliberately set the fire, the person is summoned before the elders and fined. Keeping a good environment is the best way to enjoy our lives here. The campaigners raise awareness among villagers. We've been getting fewer rains in recent years and instead severe storms that destroy our homes. That's why I believe the young people if they tell us to plant trees instead of cutting them down. It's better than our old practices. Sumaila Nashiru is proud that his messages are being heard. The villagers used to regularly cut down trees here. The landscape was bare until they started reforesting 3 years ago. The villagers now only take individual branches for firewood instead of cutting down the whole tree. The Youth Brigade receives support from both national and international sponsors. Together with the villagers, they were able to plant 5 more hectares of acacia trees.
This is the acacia parkland. As we stop the woman from cutting the trees for firewood and also burning charcoal. So we planted this acacia for the next 3 years or 2 years coming. They can get firewood for preparing their food.
The local organization's project managers regularly visit Nanyeri to find out how things are going. They also give tips on how the villagers can protect themselves from storms or floods, such as plant more indigenous trees to create windbreaks. After 3 years, the program manager makes an initial assessment.
One community at a time, we can manage climate change. It's all of us, our efforts together, that will ensure that our environment is safe for us and for future generations.
This also includes regularly collecting plastic that would otherwise be blown around by the wind. Such youth brigades now exist in 5 communities in northeastern Ghana. 20 volunteers are always active there, taking the many small steps together with the villagers to at least counteract anthropogenic climate change on a local level.
We head now to Kenya, where rural communities often face tough challenges in accessing reliable medical care. Vaccines save 4 to 5 million lives every year worldwide, yet a huge amount goes to waste because of inadequate refrigeration in the supply chain. With Kenya's abundant sunshine, solar-powered equipment could help to reshape the country's healthcare inequality.
Who would have thought that solar power could lead to greater health equity? Take this mobile clinic in Kenya. All its equipment is solar powered, so it can serve people for whom a regular clinic is too far away. Or this box, which can transport medicines to healthcare providers in remote regions and still keep them refrigerated. Two examples of how green innovations are revolutionizing healthcare in rural Kenya. The mobile clinic has arrived. People are queuing up to be examined. That's because here in Bungoma region, the nearest regular clinic is 20 kilometers away, and that's not the only attraction.
I've come here for breast cancer screening and a post-cesarean checkup. I am here because the healthcare is free. If I had gone to a normal hospital, they would have charged me.
Inside, mammograms are performed behind a curtain. The mobile clinic's machines are all solar powered, including the air conditioning. It's this autonomous power supply that makes it possible to provide services out in the field. The truck is provided by the NGO AMREF, financed by the Kenyan government and international partnerships.
We were able to reach over 15,000 people. We screened for hypertension and diabetes. For the women cancer screening, we were able to reach around over 3,000 women whom we screened for the cervical and breast cancer, and more than 2,000 men whom we screened for breast cancer.
But the small island of Ringiti in the Kenyan part of Lake Victoria is impossible to reach, even for the mobile clinic. The population of around 5,000 lives mainly on fishing. Ringiti is not connected to Kenya's national power grid, and power from the local solar company is unreliable. Nonetheless, Little Blessing is about to get vaccinated against diphtheria, hepatitis B, and rotavirus. The health clinic on Ringiti can keep its vaccines refrigerated despite power cuts. Its so-called Vaxibox can keep jabs for up to 3 days thanks to its battery.
Now, for that vaccine to stay potent, it has to be kept at a temperature of +2 and between +2 and +8. And that is the reason why we must have cold chain equipment.
The vaccine for Blessing has had quite a journey to get to her. Once a month, head nurse Casmel Mirinda fetches vaccines and other medicines from neighboring island Mfangano, a 4-hour round trip. The Vaxibox is crucial in keeping the inoculums cold during the long trip. We switch now to the Kenyan capital and economic hub, Nairobi. This is where Drop Access is based, the manufacturer of the miniature fridge. The Vaxibox can be operated and charged using either solar power or mains electricity. At its heart are the batteries. The Vaxibox was invented by Nora Magero, the first Kenyan woman to win the UK's Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation. It was a personal experience that inspired her to come up with a solution.
I faced some challenges trying to get my daughter vaccinated because I go to the clinic and I'll find like the vaccines are not available, especially after there has been a very long blackout. So I decided to seek a solution that will help mothers like myself just have vaccines for the child whenever they needed it.
Back to the clinic on the island of Ringiti. Thanks to the vaccines from the mini fridge, Little Blessing can finally be vaccinated. A few months ago, this would not have been possible.
This is the first time I can say their services are good. We inquired in advance and were able to get the vaccines here. It would have been stressful otherwise because the nearest hospital is in Mbita, which is quite far.
I used to do immunizations 1 in a month because we didn't have any cold chain equipment where we could store our vaccines. So we'll just assemble the mothers on one particular day and do the immunization. But since we got the Vaxibox, we were able to now keep our vaccines here, and we are able now to do our immunizations on a daily basis.
Since 2021, stainless steel boxes like this one have delivered over 1 million vaccines for humans and even livestock. They've ensured regular vaccinations for 250,000 children under the age of 5.
That's all we have for you today. Would love to hear your thoughts on the show. So please do get in touch at eco@dw.com. You can also find more inspiring stories by searching for Eco Africa online. Thanks for watching. For now, it's goodbye from me, Chris Alems, in Lagos, Nigeria. See you soon.